The Vorian council chamber gleamed with crystalline walls that reflected 1,000 alien faces, each one representing a civilization that had endured for millennia. Today, they voted on extinction. The holographic display showed demographic charts, resource projections, and casualty estimates, all clinical, all bloodless. The Krell Confederation had deemed the Ashani people incompatible with regional stability. 12 million souls marked for erasure. The vote passed 847-3. Ambassador Marcus Webb stood frozen at Earth's observation platform, his hands gripping the railing hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Around him, other species delegates checked their data pads or conversed quietly, as if they'd just approved a infrastructure budget rather than sanctioned genocide. The feeds began almost immediately, orbital platforms realigning, energy signatures building, then the first city burned. Ashana Prime's capital became a crater in 17 seconds. Its population of 400,000 simply ceasing to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Webb's translator earpiece filled with alien languages, discussing lunch plans and trade agreements, while the death toll climbed past 1 million. The UN Security Council chamber in Geneva had never felt so cold despite the summer heat outside. Every screen showed the same nightmare Ashani cities turning to ash. Refugees fleeing into wilderness, only to be hunted by automated drones. Children stumbling through smoke that had once been their parents. President Martinez of the Pan American Union slammed both palms on the conference table. "We have to do something." Chancellor Okoye of the African Federation shook her head slowly. "Do what, exactly? We're 3 generations into galactic citizenship. Every treaty we've signed forbids interference in internal matters. This is considered internal." Prime Minister Chen of the Pacific Alliance pulled up the casualty projections. 7 million dead in the first 18 hours. At this rate, the Ashani ceased to exist in 4 days. The debate raged for 6 hours, while the death toll climbed. Outside the building, crowds swelled, protesters from every continent, holding signs in 100 languages, demanding intervention. A child's toy, an Ashani cultural export that had become popular on Earth, lay trampled in the street. Its electronic voice repeated its programmed phrase, "Friendship makes us strong." On every news network, the same images replayed an Ashani mother shielding her infant with her body as white fire consumed them both. Their final moments captured by an automated documentation drone. Journalists wept openly during broadcasts. Social media became an ocean of rage and grief. Humanity had prided itself on learning from its own dark history, on building something better. Now they watched history's worst crimes play out in real time, sanctioned by the very council they'd fought so hard to join. Marcus Webb returned to the council chambers 3 days into the genocide. The alien delegates barely looked up as he approached the central podium, breaching a dozen protocols. "This isn't war," he said, his voice cutting through casual conversations. "War has objectives. This is slaughter. This is the systematic annihilation of a people whose only crime was existing in a region someone else wanted." A Krell representative, its carapace gleaming like oil on water, waved a dismissive claw. "Ambassador Webb, your species' emotional volatility is noted, but sentimentality has no place in pragmatic governance. The Ashani resource conflict threatened stability across 17 sectors. We resolved it efficiently." "Efficiently," Webb repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You murdered 7 million sentients, and you call it efficient?" Around the chamber, aliens finally paid attention, not because of his words, but because of something in his tone they'd never heard from humans before. The Krell delegate's translator probably couldn't capture the specific timbre of rage compressed into ice. "Your species prides itself on emotional intelligence and ethical frameworks," another counselor said, this one resembling a colony of bioluminescent coral. "Surely you understand that soft hearts breed weakness. The galaxy runs on power, not compassion." Webb stared at the assembled delegates, these ancient civilizations that had forgotten what it meant to fight for anything beyond convenience. "You're right," he said quietly. "We've been civilized. That ends today." The footage that broke humanity came from a refugee camp on the Ashani colony of Remembrance. A human aid worker had managed to establish contact with survivors fleeing into the polar regions. 17,000 Ashani, mostly children and elderly, huddled in caves while Krell hunter drones methodically searched for stragglers. The human broadcast operators hesitated, knowing what was coming, but aired it anyway. The world needed to see. The drones found the caves just after local dawn. There were no weapons among the refugees, no strategic value to the location. The killings took 6 minutes. The youngest victim was 3 weeks old. Earth didn't erupt. Eruptions are hot and chaotic. What happened was colder. Every major city went silent simultaneously, billions of humans watching the footage in squares and homes and workplaces. Then the crowds began to move, not rioting, not even chanting, just moving toward government centers, military installations, embassies. The message was wordless, but absolute. Earth's combined military command received 97% approval ratings when they announced mobilization. Politicians who urged caution found themselves speaking to empty rooms. The human species had made a collective decision, and it came from somewhere deeper than democracy. In a bunker beneath the Transantarctic Mountains, lights activated for the first time in 70 years. When humanity had joined the Galactic Council, certain research projects had been quietly shelved. Not destroyed. No government actually destroys its darkest weapons, but locked away with the promise they'd never see daylight. Project Fenrir, Project Stormbreak, Project Morningstar. The engineers who'd spent their careers mothballing these nightmares now found themselves pulling them from storage. Dr. Amara Okonkwo watched as the first prototype came online, its drives bending space in ways that violated 3 separate galactic conventions. "I spent 20 years making sure nobody would ever use this," she said to no one in particular. "Now I'm preparing 100 of them for deployment." A general standing beside her, Rodriguez, his name tag said, nodded slowly. "We were civilized. Dr. Day made us monsters." The human fleets that departed Earth bore little resemblance to the exploration vessels that had carried humanity to the stars. These ships were ugly, brutal things, all angular armor and oversized weapons arrays. They moved faster than Council regulations permitted, using drives that tore at the fabric of space itself. Fighter pilots recorded messages to their families before launch. "I enlisted to explore the cosmos," one said, her face barely visible in the cockpit's glow, "to see wonders and make first contact with new species. Instead, I'm flying to commit acts of war that'll probably land in history books under the atrocities chapter. But those images from remembrance. I'll see those kids' faces until I die anyway. At least this way, I make it count." The Krell Confederation didn't take humanity's threat seriously until the first supply convoy vanished. 7 massive freighters carrying food, fuel, and weapons to the Genocide fleets simply stopped reporting. Search parties found nothing, no debris, no distress signals, no survivors. The next convoy traveled with full military escort. It vanished too. Then the patrol stations went dark, one after another, bleeding away the Krell's operational intelligence. They were being blinded, systematically and efficiently. Admiral James Kowalski watched the operation from the bridge of the UHSS Retribution, humanity's first dreadnought-class warship. "The Council thinks we're soft because we value life," he said, reviewing the tactical display, showing another Krell target painted red. "They mistake compassion for weakness. We're about to provide a correction." When Marcus Webb returned to the Council chambers, he didn't request permission to speak. He walked to the central podium and broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. "The United Human Coalition does not negotiate with butchers," he said, his image appearing on screens across 1,000 worlds. "The Krell Confederation has been given 72 hours to withdraw all forces from Ashani space and surrender their leadership for trial. Failure to comply will result in direct military intervention." The Council erupted in outraged debates about jurisdiction and protocol, an ancient precedent. Webb let them shout for exactly 30 seconds before cutting them off. "We're not asking permission. We're providing notification." The age of politely watching genocide from the sidelines ended when the first Ashani child died. The assault on Genocide fleet. Theta happened during the Krell High Command's shift changer detail human intelligence had carefully noted. 17 human corvettes dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside the Krell formation, close enough that point defense systems couldn't track them. The electromagnetic pulse weapons Earth had never wanted to use turned the fleet's electronics into expensive sculptures. 37 Krell warships drifted helpless, their crews alive but blind and mute in the darkness. Human marines boarded each vessel, moving through corridors with practiced precision, securing command staff and releasing the Ashani prisoners held in the cargo bays. When the Krell commanders finally got communications restored, they found themselves facing trial by the very people they'd tried to exterminate. The broadcasts from liberated Ashani camps showed the strange duality of Earth's intervention. Human soldiers moved through the facilities with terrifying efficiency, eliminating guards who resisted and subduing those who surrendered. But the same troops who'd just fought through 3 decks of armed Krell carried Ashani children to safety with infinite gentleness. A news crew captured the moment a hardened Marine, fresh from combat with score marks still smoking on his armor, knelt beside a traumatized Ashani youth and simply held them while they cried. "Are they angels or demons?" one refugee asked. The reporter had no answer. The Galactic Council found itself in unprecedented crisis. Ambassador Sarah of the Voidborn Collective addressed the emergency session with 4 of her 6 eye clusters focused on the human delegation. Earth has violated 17 accords, broken 43 treaties, and committed acts of war against a council member state. Yet, double quotes, she paused, and something almost like respect colored her words. They have meticulously avoided civilian casualties. Every target has been military or leadership. They are brutal, but not indiscriminate. They have stopped being civilized. But they have not abandoned their principles. A Krell representative who'd escaped the purge hissed through his translator. "They're savages. War criminals. No better than Marcus Webb's laugh. Cut him off. Better. You're right. We're not better. We're just effective." The siege of Krell Prime lasted 9 days. Human fleets blockaded the system, allowing food and medicine to reach civilian populations, but cutting off all military resupply. Every government facility, every command center, every propaganda transmitter received the same message. Surrender the architects of genocide, or watch your leadership starve while your people eat. The Krell population, exhausted by decades of militaristic government and horrified by what had been done in their name, made the choice themselves. The uprising took 18 hours. The trials began the next day. The council watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated the difference between justice and revenge. The guilty died. The soldiers who'd just followed orders were imprisoned. The civilians were left alone. When the Ashani survivors testified, human translators wept, but the human judges remained stone-faced. This wasn't about satisfaction, it was about setting a precedent that would echo across the stars. 6 months after the last Krell genocide fleet surrendered, Ambassador Webb stood before the council again. This time, they listened. "You want to know what changed," he said, scanning the assembled alien delegates. "How the species that arrived here preaching cooperation and mutual understanding became something you fear. Here's what you need to understand about humanity. We remember our own history of slavery and Holocaust and ethnic cleansing. We remember promising never again. When you casually voted to erase the Ashani, you didn't just authorize genocide, you spat on every lesson humanity learned through blood and tears." He pulled up the image of the Ashani mother and child from remembrance, frozen in their final moment. "This was your never again moment, and you failed. So we stopped being civilized. We became what was necessary to end it." The vote to grant humanity a permanent enforcement seat on the council passed 712 to 289. Earth didn't celebrate. General Rodriguez, now appointed to head the Human Protection Fleet, stood in what had once been Ashana Prime's capital city. Ashani workers were already rebuilding, aided by human engineers and protected by human marines. A young Ashani approached him, speaking through a translator device. "My people call you saviors. Others call you executioners. Which are you?" Rodriguez watched a human soldier help raise a shelter frame, then turned back to the Ashani. "Both. Will always be both. That's the price we paid to save you." The new human dreadnoughts now patrolled the borders between council space and the wild regions beyond. They don't fly the bright colors of exploration vessels or carry the diplomatic insignias of peaceful contact. They're painted the color of storm clouds and regret, and every species that sees them remembers the same lesson. Humanity tried civilization first. When that failed, they showed the galaxy what comes next. The Ashani survivors carved a memorial on remembrance, a simple monument, showing a human hand and an Ashani limb intertwined. The inscription, translated into every galactic language, reads, "In the darkest hour, they stopped being civilized so we could survive." Human children now grow up learning about the Ashani war in school. The lessons are uncomfortable, full of moral complexity and questions without clean answers. Did Earth do the right thing? Were the methods justified? Could there have been another way? The debates continue in universities and forums across human space. But every human who watches the recovered footage from remembrance, who sees those final moments in the caves, arrives at the same conclusion their ancestors did. There are lines that, once crossed, erase all the rules. Genocide is that line. Webb retired from diplomatic service and spent his final years at a small Ashani settlement on a human colony world. Reporters sometimes asked him if he regretted the war, the deaths, the cost. His answer never changed. I regret that it was necessary. I regret every Krell soldier who died because their leaders were monsters. I regret the innocence humanity lost when we unsealed those weapons. He'd pause, staring at something distant. But I don't regret stopping the genocide. In the face of annihilation, we chose rage over civility. The galaxy will never forget. Neither will we.